welcome to the Of Interest podcast. I'm Gareth Vaughan from interest.co.nz. Artificial intelligence, or AI as we tend to refer to it, has become hard to escape. Whether it's content created by AI spamming your social media feeds, talk of it putting humans out of work, worries about an AI investment bubble, or even the US military using the AI assistant Claude to help capture Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, or something else altogether, it feels like AI is certainly omnipresent in our lives today. To discuss all this, I'm joined by Mark Laurence. Mark is the founder and CEO of 10 Past Tomorrow, which is an AI consultancy and education business through which he works with senior leadership teams around New Zealand. Hi, Mark, and welcome to the Of Interest podcast. It's great to have you with us.
Hi, Gareth. Thanks for having me here.
Look, I thought maybe just as a starting point, it'd be interesting to hear in terms of the clients you work with, New Zealand businesses, how are they working with AI and how are they thinking about AI? And I'm sure there's plenty of variety amongst them.
There's a lot of variety amongst them, but if you're trying to pin me down and say, what does it look like in terms of your quintessential New Zealand senior leadership team and how they're approaching the technology, it's interesting to look at it as a shift, actually. If you go back to, if you say this all started for most people with the ChatGPT moment, which was November 22, in general, senior leadership teams spent 2023 sitting on the fence, and we had a lot of conversations that year, which were basically, is this the metaverse? Is this crypto? Is this NFTs reborn? i.e., is this still going to be around in a year's time, or is it a flash in the pan? And then something happened over that summer between 2023 and 2024, and we came back January 24, and the first movers started to get going. And so what it looked like then, the start of 24 to be a first mover, if you're a senior leadership team, you were buying ChatGPT or Copilot subscriptions for your staff. Probably for a select few of your staff, you were running pilots, you were tinkering, you were experimenting, and that was okay. That was enough to be experimenting. Unfortunately, a lot of New Zealand has stayed stagnated in that phase. And if you talk to a lot of senior leaders, they'll say, "Oh, well, we're really happy. We're kind of experimenting. We're running a few little pilot schemes. We're tinkering around the edges, but we're just waiting for things to settle down a little bit." Whereas actually, now we're, start of 26, if you fast forward and say, well, who are the front runners now? Like companies that we've been working with for a couple of years are now to the point where they have got their heads around the fact that this is a full cultural change moment and leadership change moment, more than a technology change. And so what does that mean? Like, yes, they've bought licenses, they've bought the subscriptions for everybody in the company, but they've committed to full scale skills training for all of their operational staff and what we call strategic implications training for senior leadership teams. So understanding, how does this change the rhythm of your company? And it's become, for those companies, I'd summarize it by saying, it's not just bolting AI onto the existing way of doing things. They are now going through full capability overhauls and reinventing their processes, their operations, but also evolving their culture, to say AI is here, it is acceptable, we are promoting it. And in doing so, we are open to the fact that, cognizant of the fact that it is changing everything. Therefore, it changes your roles. And there's a psychological element to that and a cultural element to that. So if you ask me how many are there, very few, actually. That is the tip of the iceberg in terms of leadership teams that have made it there and have brought their companies that far. Most are still stuck in the tinkering, experimenting, pilot use case phase.
And just in terms of the thinking, obviously there'll be those who are seeing great opportunities through AI, but is there also the mentality that it's a threat? Is that out there as well?
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%. And you kind of opened with it at the top of the show. And, that's part of why we say it's as much a cultural change challenge as it is a technical challenge. You can this tech, that from a technology point of view, really this tech is built that you just interact with it like you interact with a human. And yes, there's like a there's a capability curve in terms of knowing where to click and what to do, but really when it comes down to it, you interact with it like you would interact with a human colleague. But the bigger challenge is what you're talking about. It's the psychological things that are at play around that of like, well, is this a threat to me? Is this just an immediate threat to my job and my role, and then to our industry? And then what does that mean going forward? What does work actually look like for me and for humans going forward? And what does it look like for education? What does it look like for parenting? How are my children going to be raised? And what do I need to be doing to bring them up in this world? And so, at 100%, a lot of like really good AI deployment involves careful management and leadership of all of those, not just here's Copilot, go for it.
So one of the things we like to do with this podcast is kind of look at the big picture, kind of macro perspective. So I'm really keen to do that with you. I mean, as a guy, I guess from a sort of New Zealand Inc. perspective. So you recently spoke at Waikato University at the New Zealand Economic Forum, and you talked a little bit about, what some countries around the world are doing, I guess the Singapores, UAE, and obviously in New Zealand, we're always interested in what Australia's doing. Our sort of big brother, we want to compete with them. And obviously it is an election year in New Zealand this year. So I'm just interested to see, I guess, firstly, should AI be on the election agenda? Should this be a real issue this year in New Zealand? And then I guess, what should we want from our politicians in terms of AI?
Short answer is yes. I'm kind of flabbergasted that it hasn't become a political talking point. If you watch, and I'm not a huge follower of US politics, but it's noticeable that it has become a really hot political topic for them in the past 6 months. Why is that? A lot of their economy is directly being propped up by the infrastructure spending at the moment on data centers. So there's a different flavor to it for them. Whereas what I said at the Economic Forum is, if you extrapolate from the individual user of AI, where productivity lift can be, depending on the skill level of the person, can be anywhere from kind of a 20% increase in productivity and efficiency straight off the bat without any training, through to hundreds of percent, for an individual. You extrapolate that to a company level, and then you extrapolate that to a national level and GDP. That was kind of the crux of my talk there. But what it comes back to is, as I just said, it's dependent on the skill level, the literacy, understanding of this technology and how to use it powerfully. And so, and I'll answer your question more deeply around comparison to those other nations that I talked to. But really that comparison I want to make is, who are the countries that are investing in capability training for their population? And I'd separate that out from the infrastructure spending. So it's, for me, what's important to New Zealand. It's not that we go toe to toe with Silicon Valley and China and try and build the biggest models. We're not going to compete on that front, nor is it really our play to compete on infrastructure and building these data centers. Although I think that's an interesting thing for the government to explore, given how much renewable energy we have untapped here. But really my focus is, how does New Zealand, as a small, educated, economically prosperous, and like politically stable country, how do we become the best users of this technology? We're as a nation, we're very skilled and very literate and know how to use it, know when to use it, know how to use it responsibly and ethically. Because, as I've just said, you can scale from the individual productivity to national GDP on a very clear line, right? So my comparisons here are, New Zealand, we've made a commitment over the next 10 years to spend $70 million directly on AI on research and R&D, right? And that's primarily through what was Callahan, and commercialization of those ideas, which it's fine. And my comparison, however, to where I think best practice is Singapore, who have, 5.9 million people versus our 5.3. They're spending 1.25 billion New Zealand dollars over the next 5 years. And their stated goal is to triple their AI practitioner workforce. And for me, that's what it's all about. So spending 250 million New Zealand dollars per year is 25 times more than us to upskill their population, right? The UK, they're an excellent example as well. I think they're putting 500 million US dollars per year over the next 5 years. Their goal, to have 10 million AI literate workers by 2030, right? And that's like real already. They've delivered 1 million courses. Finland, similar size to us, similar numbers, 100 million euros per year for the next 4 years in AI readiness training, right? The UAE is doing a similar thing. Even the States, who, yes, they're primarily focused on building the tech to beat China, even they and even him are putting money into like literacy training. So that's my passion, and we see it, and we see the microcosm of what happens at an individual business level can be extrapolated to our small nation.
So this type of investment you're talking about in other countries, this is government-led. So, I mean, yeah.
Sorry, you go.
Yeah, so I guess, so from a New Zealand Inc. perspective, to get that the population much more literate and comfortable using AI, understanding AI and what it can do, you think, it does need to be government-led?
I do, and I think importantly, it needs to be non-partisan. So I think this needs to be put in place, like you're talking about in an election year. Whichever party wins, this needs to happen. To me, it's that critical to New Zealand productivity challenges. And so, yes, it absolutely needs to be publicly led. But also, what's interesting, if you look at a lot of those countries that I just quoted, the public investment, it's almost always it's backed by somewhere between like 10 to 1 and 20 to 1 of private investment floods in behind it. So yeah, I think we have an AI strategy which was released last year. It's pretty flimsy, and really, if you kind of read between the lines, it's basically saying at the moment we're leaving this to the private sector to kickstart. I do think, as you're saying, the stimulus needs to come, the action needs to come, the motivation needs to come from public sector first.
I just wonder, and I mean, just in terms of whether you interact very, very often with the public service or indeed with politicians, whether you think they grasp this.
We have worked with a number of government departments and organizations over the last few years, so they grasp it. I actually, at the Economic Forum, I stood there and I said I would offer 2 full days of in-the-room training with Parliament and with our government, because I don't think they grasp it. But I don't mean in an accusatory fashion. I mean it in the same way when I sit and I talk with the CEO and senior leadership team of a packaging company. It's like they are busy. Their full-time job is their people and their role. It's unfair to expect them to be keeping track of AI and like the intricacies of it. And so that's why within our own delivery, we focus on working with the leadership teams first, because if you can upskill leadership teams and really like give them that tangible feeling of how powerful the tools are, then you can progress the conversation to, okay, well, what are the wider strategic implications of this for your business and your industry? And I think, again, I'm using the word extrapolation a lot, but if you were to do that, it's my supposition, if you were to do that with government and give them those feelings of like, holy shit, that thing used to take me a month. I just did it in 4 hours. If they have that tangible feeling, then they can extrapolate and say, okay, I could see what that means for businesses, and the tangible practical feeds the strategic understanding. So yeah, I believe that just as our senior leaders of business benefit from this upskilling, so would our government.
And training is obviously a key area. And I mean, you mentioned children before. So I'm just interested for different age groups. I mean, obviously AI has evolved massively since you mentioned ChatGPT in 2022. Even since then, it's just leaps and bounds. Who knows where we'll be 6 months from now. So in terms of training and working with different age groups, what do you think are the keys? How does it differ for different age groups, and are there particular key areas for them?
This is an interesting question, actually, because tomorrow I've been asked by our local community retirement home to come and speak to them about what AI means. But do I speak directly to the residents? So I've been thinking about that, like how do I frame it for them? I could come back to that, but in terms of like this discussion, the way we see it within the business world, is that you start with the leaders, the executive leadership team and the board, right? And that is around skills, like I said, skills training, but then they also need governance, safety, risk, ethics, responsible use, understanding what effect will this have on our people. Like that's a really important part of the education and the training. For managers, it's around productivity and actual understanding how do whole workflows change. Like I said, it's not about just doing what you do 10% faster. It's the knowledge of this changes whole workflows, and how does that affect my people? And then when that does, that's when the middle management, actually a lot of it falls on that psychological understanding, that culture change of like understanding this brings up new norms and new way of doing things and handling resistance as well as like inspiration. And then when you get down to operational teams, it's the practical, it's the real skills training. And so I guess if you're asking me to go further than that and say like, well, what is it? And we do work with universities. If you're talking about what does it mean for our kids and what does the training need to be there, I think a lot of it is actually around. I think a lot of the focus has been on let's catch kids cheating with AI, and I think the world needs to move past that. Like it's so clearly an incredible and revolutionary teaching resource. And yes, it comes with massive risks. And one of the huge risks is like just cognitive laziness. And so for me, like when we're talking about children, it's how do you teach them to understand, like to retain critical thinking, how do you teach them that these things are not like all-knowing oracles of everything, and that if we're going to use them, we use them to supplement our intelligence and supplement our like humanness and instinct and gut feel, and we can't ever like give those things away just to take the answer at first glance. So that's where I see the training kind of flowing all the way down to school level. And I believe even if you look at it at how do we help our children, that's a long-term investment in economy as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, talking about some of the risks there, and I guess that I like your point about critical thinking and maintaining that, because I totally, that's something I've been sort of preaching to my own kids. So I like to hear you say that.
Can I give you a little nugget that seems to work well with kids there, Gareth? Is AI is going to make lazy people super lazy, and it will give dedicated people superpowers. So if they choose to stay involved, like I say, superpowers are there at their touch. But if they choose to just give over and not put their thinking in, they're at risk of becoming super lazy.
Just in terms of, I guess, guardrails or regulation, this has been a debate really probably since the ChatGPT moment, or even before. Like, people saying, AI is going to take over the world. We need to regulate this or do that, or don't regulate it because you'll kill it. I mean, where do you stand on that? And from a New Zealand perspective, I guess, what approach should we be looking at?
You mentioned Anthropic and Pentagon in your intro. That's an interesting one because, yes, there's that story about how they used Anthropic models to find that specific terrorist. But then also, if you've been reading over the past week, the Pentagon's actually about to stop funding Anthropic because Anthropic have come out publicly and said, you know what, we're not on board with the way this is going in terms of using AI for warfare. And so we're publicly saying that there need to be more guardrails around that. And so Trump's saying, okay, well, you're not getting your $200 million anymore. So like there's guardrails at the like where the genesis of the technology, who's building this stuff, and do they need to be held to account? And there's also guardrails in terms of like, well, how do we, for New Zealand small businesses, what guardrails do we need to be putting in place? Do you have a preference on where you'd want to discuss that?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the New Zealand economy is small businesses, so that's probably an interesting place to look.
Yeah. So the way we teach this is that there's this curious phenomenon where over the last couple of years, as small businesses have been waking up to moving with AI, one of the first things they do is create usage policies, because that's what you do traditionally with software. You get a new CRM, you write a usage policy around how to use it, and you can't extrapolate directly from traditional software to AI. And so what's been happening is guardrails get written, and unfortunately they were largely written by senior leadership teams who are not AI literate themselves. And so what happens is you get these very restrictive, intimidating usage policies which get disseminated into the company. And that's actually ends up being your first cultural, whether you like it or not, that's your first cultural signpost around what you believe around AI. And so what we teach is the guardrails and the usage policies need to happen at the same time as the capability training for senior leadership teams and the skills training for your operational teams, because then they become permissive and safe and ethically sound. And so what does that mean? It means usage policies that say, these are the tools which we approve. We're looking for tools that do not train on our data. We lay out really clearly data handling rules. So this is the data that you can put into the tools. This is what you can't. Around human review standards, around saying, we want it implicit within all or most of our work, but we own the work. It's the humans that own the work, and it's our company name which owns the work. And so then this is part of that, like, not cognitively offloading thing. So most New Zealand organizations still don't have an AI usage policy. Those that do, the great ones, are the ones that go hand in hand with the capability training as well. Then they become really ethically sound, and they become focused in their people. They're not just generic restrictive policies.
One of the questions I've been sort of throwing around in my own mind, and I'd be interested in your take on this, is there like a prior technological breakthrough or development that you'd compare AI with? And if so, what would it be?
Could I be cheeky enough and ask whether you've settled on one yourself, Gareth, when you've been playing around with this idea?
I haven't actually.
Yeah, because look, I get asked this question every now and then. Sometimes I play along and say, yes, it's really similar to electricity. And other times I'm like, you know what? There's nothing that has come like this. So let me land somewhere in between and say it's similar to electricity in that it's a general purpose technology. So just like it would be if I said, can you write a user manual for electricity? It's just impossible because there's infinite uses of the technology and it means different things. to different people, but it has become so infused in our life that you could not imagine life without it. That's a general purpose technology. And likewise, when electricity was first invented, yes, you could clearly see that it was going to power. You could see the use of a light bulb, right? That didn't take a huge mental leap, but you could never have imagined that it would lead to like an MRI machine in the middle of a hospital. And I think we're at the same point with AI, and that it's a general purpose technology. It can be infused into everything. However, it's a general purpose intelligence, and so it has touch points into basically every facet of our life, certainly every facet of our working lives. And so in that case, I would say it's unlike anything that we have seen before. And I think that's maybe what people struggle to get their heads around at scale.
Obviously, there's been a lot of, I guess, discussion and concern around, I'm thinking particularly with social media, with the algorithms, directing you in certain directions, and concerns raised about some of the individuals and companies that run those. Should we have any similar concerns around AI? I mean, the things like say if I'm using AI as a research tool, the things it's picking out for me that I should be looking at. I mean, should we have concerns in that area?
Yeah, 100%. And like I'm really heartened by, you'd be aware of the Before 16 movement in New Zealand, and Anna Mowbray and her crew are doing like incredible work there to make sure that social media tools are outlawed for our under 16s. I'm heartened by the fact that like I've had personal contact with them, so they're kind of starting to ask the question of should they be folding their research a little wider into AI tools? Because I think if you're talking about for children, the threat for children, I would actually say AI's, pick a number, 100-fold potentially more worrisome about its effects and harms on our children than social media has been. I think the world has learned some really serious lessons from the social media age, and I believe that we will approach AI differently. I'm also kind of heartened by some of the people that are leading and building AI. Some not, particularly Demis Hassabis, who leads Google, and Dario Amodeo, who leads Anthropic. You listen to them, and they're really they're determined that their tools are not governed by engagement metrics. So they're not trying to keep people on for as long as possible. That's not what drives them. I'm less trustful of maybe OpenAI and certainly of Elon. And so that's one part of your question, is that the effect on children. And then the second part of like, what does it mean for adults? And really my worry there is the cognitive laziness, the falling asleep at the wheel, like you said. And if you do a research project, the tools are so good now. When ChatGPT first came out, it was just noticeably bad in some areas, and it was kind of so bad that it was your natural instinct to say, I need to check this thing. They're now so powerful and so good, and what you call the hallucination rates, which is the rate that they just make stuff up, is down to around 1% when you're using the best models, which is I hallucinate much more than 1% when I'm doing work. So in a way, the more powerful they become, the higher the tendency to fall asleep at the wheel. So I'm concerned about that. But again, to me, that doesn't actually come back to the technology. That comes back to, that's what I'm talking about with literacy training and skills training. How do we, as a nation, understand those risks and concerns and work with them, but not just stick our heads in the sand and say, well, that's a reason for just not moving with the technology?
So I've got another sort of 3 or 4 questions here. I might just roll them all together as a sort of final finale because they're kind of linked. I mean, in your Waikato University presentation, you said sitting still is a decision with consequences. So I'm interested, what are those consequences? And then also, if we have already spoken a little bit about how fast the technology is moving, but if you could say a little bit more about that and what are the dangers of being left behind, I guess, back to that New Zealand Inc. perspective with all those things you talk about other countries doing.
Look, in a nutshell, the risk of sitting still is that the gap compounds. And so the theme that I wrapped that particular keynote around was what has been called the AI capability overhang. And so I actually did a live demonstration on stage that day with Claude and the agentic capabilities that Claude has developed in the last 6 months. And so really, like, what did I do? I did kind of the equivalent of about 2 days of work on stage in the background. I just gave it a prompt and it prepared PowerPoint presentations and emails and slide decks and Excel models and live dashboards and web apps, prepared all that while I was talking. And so what's that? The capability overhang is the ability for the tools now to do that. Whereas most of, let's say New Zealand, but it's actually a lot of the world, most of New Zealand still has the mindset of, oh, well, ChatGPT is AI, and really all it does is produce text, and it produces it pretty badly. Or I've got Copilot and I use it just to like put my emails in a different tone of voice and summarize some long documents. So the capability gap is if we stay here, and if other, you can either say businesses or at the national level, if other countries are at the forefront and they're putting, significant money and investment into their people, if they're moving at the front edge of that capability overhang and we're at the back end, the gap compounds, right? And to put really simply, this nation has an obsession with the productivity challenges that we've developed in the last number of years. The risk, that's why I say sitting still is not a neutral option. It's a decision with consequences. The gap compounds, move from being a gap to actually a chasm.
Well, look, Mark, it's a fascinating discussion and important topic. I really appreciate your time. That's Mark Laurence, the founder and CEO of 10 Past Tomorrow, and I'm Gareth Vaughan from interest.co.nz with another episode of our Of Interest podcast.